Well, first podcast of 2026. And really looking to having a conversation because I'm really curious about this conversation. I'm joined by Barry Jones. Barry, welcome.
Hi, how you going?
I'm good. And judging by his initial hello, you'd understand that he's based in Australia, but working in the field of ice hockey, which is not necessarily something that you associate with Australia particularly. But anyway, Barry, tell me your story. Take me on the journey because I'm curious, and I know the audience will be.
Yeah, look, hockey's been a passion of mine since I was a child of sort of 13, 14 years of age, started playing the game. Um, had a fairly good experience with the culture and the connection, and sort of wanted to put something back. So sort of 19, 20 became a sort of a hockey coach, I guess, per se, looking after, grassroots and things like that, trying to, I guess, pass on the information that I guess the environment gave me at the time, which was good. And that sort of went through till about 30 years of age, where I sort of, I guess, you have, as you get older and older, you have multiple versions of yourself. And so I sort of drifted away from the sport then, and sort of started looking after people with disabilities. So that was something that I thought might be the next phase for me. So, and I spent, 3 or 4 years working with people with disabilities, and then sort of drifted off, got a family, uh, spent a bit of time looking after the family, and sort of came back into the sport around 2018. So 2018 sort of turned up. I've done a little bit of coaching environmentally, so looking at different sports and seeing how they interacted, and looked at how um, I guess I got this idea that people were different from when I worked with people with disabilities. It was one of those things that you sort of, there's no cookie cutter style scenario for every person is slightly different. And it sort of got me on this journey of understanding where everyone is different and everyone sort of has different expectations and different needs. So I sort of came back into the coaching field at 2018, and then sort of it just branched off from there.
And so, in terms of what you're doing now, what's the primary role?
Um, Many lives, because hockey doesn't really pay the bills. um, at this stage, coming out of where we are right now, sort of we have our season runs sort of your summer season would be our winter season. So we're in our summer season phase. So in our summer season phase, we have sort of developmental stuff. Um, Sort of what we call the travel teams generally play around this time. So part of Inferno, which is a female travel team. So those things are happening at this stage. Generally, when the winter season comes around for us, that's when we start looking at sort of grassroots and things like that.
Got it. And when you talk about travel, so this is obviously I'm very familiar with the ice hockey world in the US and the sports world in the US, where you have what they call rec teams and travel teams. Rec teams tend to play locally within cities or wherever it might be. Travel teams are traveling interstate. Is that right? Or within the state?
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's correct. We're not at overly. I mean, it's ice hockey in Australia, so I mean, when you put those two together, like you thought, wow, that's intriguing. Um, there's around sort of 4.5, 5,000 people playing the sport in the country. We have 18 to 20 rinks, depending on what day it is. Um, so that sort of gives you an idea of where we are with that. Travel teams are generally teams that play, you might call it like a semi-professional, but in the women's program, it's still paid by the women. So it could be sort of, it's called semi-professional amateur program. And then in the men's, you have a sort of a league, which is more closer to our sort of a semi-professional program. And they would play in each of the states throughout sort of over a 4 to 6 month period, and then have sort of a grand final towards sort of February, March.
And is the competition done on a kind of, do you like play certain number of matches home and away in like a league, or is it more conference based, or how do you structure it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So generally, there's we've got a new team that started up this year, which is the Ducks. So Melbourne Ducks. So that sort of gave us enough teams to have sort of 20 games. We have 2 games a weekend, one Saturday, one Sunday. So we've got 10 rounds, 20 games, gives us the ability to be able to sort of play sort of 4 at home and sort of 6 away. So that's 4 rounds at home, six rounds away. So yeah, so it's half the season runs prior to Christmas and the second half runs straight after Christmas. So first, we've got games coming back in January.
And so you'll travel. I don't know why I'm interested in the logistics, but I am. So, I mean,
On a plane.
I live on this tiny little mud island, you see. So, we just like,
Yeah.
we live in a world where if you've got to travel more than 90 minutes to a game, it's too far, right? So, anyway, it's just, so
The airport's 45 from us.
that's funny. Okay. So you would travel out what on the Friday, play 2 games, travel back, and then travel back on the Sunday night or Monday or,
Well, you would think so. You would
Hmm.
think so. We went to we flew out at 5 a.m. Saturday morning, got into got into Melbourne at some stupid o'clock. Staggered around for an hour and a half, 2 hours, ate a lot of food, and then the girls were on the ice by 5. So that would have been by 3. That would have been by 2 o'clock Perth time because we have time zone differences. Played a game, slept, played the next game, back on the plane, and landed Sunday night at midnight back into Perth. So
that's
it was rough.
And the 2 games you play, is that against the same team, or are you playing 2 teams in Melbourne?
No, that's good. So yeah, so we play. So we'll fly into Melbourne, play the Melbourne team. We'll fly into Brisbane, play the Brisbane team. We'll fly into So that's sort of how that works. We sort of fly into the state, play that team twice, sort of one Saturday, one Sunday, and then basically move forward from there, and then come home, and then train, and then go back out and do it again.
Have you noticed any sort of correlation in terms of results? Like, for example, is your first game not that good a performance, and then your second game is better because you've had a bit of time to get some sleep and rest and all that sort of stuff, or is it just a complete mishmash?
Well, okay, so um, I'm a data guy, right? I love data. So historically, 22, 23, 23, 24, when I wasn't involved with the team, 37% of the time they would win on a Sunday, 68% of the time they would win on a Saturday.
Wow.
So yeah, so that just meant that they ran pretty hard on the Saturday, and then by the time they got to the Sunday, the world was catching up. And we play sort of so the girls didn't get the opportunity to sort of, I guess, experience that game the way it should be played. So, and one of the failings of the whole process is that finals are played on a Sunday. So if you're only winning Sundays 37% of the time, it's going to be you're going to struggle to win finals. So that was part of the identity I changed. I wanted to make sure that we played as well, or if not better, on the Sunday than we did on the Saturday, because it's important. Long term, it's important. So, from a conditioning perspective, from the way that we trained, from an identity perspective, how many lines we played, how we treated those lines, did we run any more or any less? So, from a tactical sort of diagnostic effect, we had to make sure that there was still enough fuel in the tank for Sunday.
So what does the data give? What is the data giving you now then in terms of the results?
So we played 10 games, 5 rounds. So if I was allowed to remove the officials out of this, because in one game the officials took goals off us because they didn't see them go in. Yes, exactly. We have video footage because it's all broadcast on Facebook and all those things, and you can see the goals go in. It's just that we're not allowed to use that as a sort of. There's no video review in Australian ice hockey. So at this stage, if I didn't include the officials taking games from us, we've done all 10 games. We've won all 10 games. At this stage, we're down to 8 games if I include the officials taking the goals from us.
Interesting. Um, Yeah, so of course, when you think of ice hockey, you either think we've obviously got the Winter Olympics coming up, where you most people will probably get their every 4 year diet of ice hockey, probably only time they ever watch it. But then you've also got like the NHL, which is what other people might watch, where of course when the puck crosses the line, a light goes off, right? You don't have that
Yeah.
technology, is that right?
We don't even have the human technology to even point at it and say it was a goal. It's all guesswork, I'm sure, out there.
Oh, if I had a pound for every time I spoke to a coach and we eventually drifted into officiating, oh, it'd be great.
I'm
um,
good. You know what? The reality is that it is part of the game, and part of my coaching identity is that those things don't phase me on the bench. I'm not a yeller and a screamer. It happens. I always have a belief that if they didn't see it, they didn't see it. I'm sure they weren't. Oh look, the puck is going down towards the net. I'm going to look the other way. I'm sure that doesn't happen. So it just is what it is. So, statistically, I can track those numbers without it having to be sort of public knowledge where it comes to how many games we've won and those types of things. It just tells me whether I need to modify the environment for the games, whether I need to change the style of coaching that we're doing, whether I need to look at how much pressure I'm included in the session. So it's more about the data for that more than understanding that, waving the flag and say we've won 10 games.
but nonetheless, you use that as an illustration to say that without those aberrations in terms of, you would have had 100% record fundamentally.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And just before we dive into the ins and outs of methodology and all those sorts of things, did you change anything in terms of beyond the identity side of things and the kind of mentality and the focus? Did you do anything else in terms of match preparedness that helped with bringing about that change of outcome?
Yeah, so the team's quite a traditional based team, and their coaching staff in the prior have been very coach sort of centered, very traditional sort of. The ownership is very much about the coach, and I'm very much a learner centered type coach. Um, so one of the things I wrote and one of the things that were lacking was any type of real identity from a coaching perspective. So the first thing I did was sort of, document what I wanted to do. I always believe that you should document what you're going to do, and it gives you a fairly good sort of map on whether you're tracking those things. So there was a psychological safety, there was the identity, there was the way I was going to coach that, which was going to be sort of an ecological dynamic, sort of a non-linear approach. I was going to use themes as opposed to ice hockey is very, very much a periodizational program where, you do this on a Tuesday, you do that on a Wednesday, you do this on a Thursday, and it always has been. Um, I'm lucky because I'm USA hockey trained, and so they tend to shift towards more of an ecological approach. And I've watched you were on the USA webinars a few times, so you understand what I'm sort of talking with that. But I mean, if you do the research, there it does feel that they've just sort of stolen the golden rule, which was a UK thing, which I saw a few years ago coming out of, I think it was grass hockey, the
Yeah,
golden rule, because it's pretty much the same. I had a chuckle when I saw it. Sort of gave me the understanding of how big this process is.
the golden thread.
Is that what it is? Yes,
The
yes.
golden thread, yes. And yeah, they openly admit that they directly just they didn't. I don't think they necessarily got it from me, or it may be that I pointed them in its direction. But I know that Zach, who works in their coaching department, stumbled across it somewhere and was like, "Oh, well, this sounds pretty cool for us." Yeah. So, and just for
Yeah,
the
and it
audience,
does. It works.
just for the audience, just to sort of help them know what I'm talking about. It's basically five kind of core principles of your session, which actually, for a period of time, was a central point of coach education as well. Where things should be fun, they should look something like the game. There should be lots of goes, lots of touches. There should be some decision making. And what's the fifth one? I always forget. There's always a fifth one. Yeah, anyway, it'll come back to me later on. I'll probably say it in the middle of the next session. But yeah, so they're the sort of broad strict framework of how you would construct a session. Okay, so you adopted the golden thread and you brought that into these ideas as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's where I started.
Mm.
The USA program is really good. I guess I was shopping for a better way, sort of back in sort of 2019, 2020. It was one of those things I thought to myself, there must be a better way than the traditional way. And this may sound odd, but COVID came through and created the digital world. And USA Hockey went completely digital and gave me an opportunity to be able to jump online and actually use the power of digital, look at all their webinars and get involved with their sort of their coaching programs and everything else. But I did shop it around. I looked at the European programs. I looked at the Canadian programs because I had the ability to. So I was lucky. I wasn't locked to anything because the fact is that I can choose whichever one I wanted to, and I went with the USA program.
Got it.
I felt it fitted me better from an ecological perspective. I felt that some of the decisions they were making was more about the athlete than it was about the coach. So and I've done the Canadian program, I've done the Australian program, I've done the USA program, and I sort of I guess I felt comfortable and at home in the USA program.
Had you already adopted a more ecological approach prior to engaging within the USA Hockey program, or was it the USA Hockey program that kind of introduced you to ecological principles?
No, I think that's a good. I think that I was already sort of there, but I just didn't know what it was called. I just didn't know that it existed that way. Um, I guess, look, one of those things when you work with people with disabilities is that you can't just have the one solution. And having the one solution means that everyone else misses out by the one person that fits that solution. So that was one of the things that I felt. 2020, I sort of stepped up and helped out with a thing called sled hockey. So it's ice hockey for people who sort of with disabilities. And that was one of the biggest changes I felt was seeing that the drills that we were running didn't make sense, and it didn't really give the practitioner, the person, the learner, an actually ability to be able to do that because it was just the one solution for everything. So that sort of made me think about changing it. I changed it, and then all of a sudden, looking at the USA program, it made more sense that I should be thinking more about the individual in the team as opposed to one solution for all.
Yeah, so this is interesting because you're, I don't know, you're one of a number of people I've spoken to, either through this podcast or separately, who has cited their work within adapted physical activity or disability sport as at least part of the reason why they have adopted a more learner or athlete centered approach, because the recognition being that when you're greeted by an array of people with a broad like differentiation in terms of their not only physical but sometimes intellectual, sometimes kind of emotional responses, you have to adopt a more individualized approach. You therefore can't use very coach centered, individualized, my way or the highway types approaches because those athletes just can't respond to it. It's really counterproductive. And as a result of that, the search for alternative approaches emerges. It's interesting, actually, that the disability community, there's a course run by the major disability federation over here called Activity Alliance. And it's called Inclusive Activity Program. And that course actually has constraints led approach baked into it without using the term constraints led approach. They just
Yeah,
talk about the
yeah,
different constraints of space, task, equipment, and people as your broad sort of way of creating adaptability to meet the needs of a range of different audiences. And it strikes me that when you see that that's good for people with disabilities, you then begin to see, oh, actually, I've got a group of able bodied individuals here, but they're all different. They all have different capabilities, and therefore I should treat them individually. So it's just a really interesting kind of observation that leads people in that direction.
yeah. I just, I mean, from the you see the extremes a lot more. I think in a disability space, I had one young man with cerebral palsy, and I had a young woman with one leg and blind. Um, how do I give them the same solution? You know, so that they both have to solve problems differently. So when I think when you look at, say, a 13U ice hockey team, you know,
Mm.
generally, you know, if you look at that, you're going to say, okay, so we've got 15 children in that team at 13 years of age, probably only 10 or 15% of them are going through puberty. You're probably thinking to yourself, they're all very similar. So you think that they're the same. I think the biggest change for me was understanding that the ecological dynamics is a language, and it's the language that people struggle with. It's the, you know, you can give someone an instruction, you can give someone a problem to solve, but they don't understand the language. And I don't mean the ice hockey language, I don't mean this, it's just the way that they perceive the expectation of that. And I think that's one of those things that the problem as a coach you need to solve is to make sure everyone understands the problem they're trying to solve, and then allow them to solve it their own way. And I think that's where coaches tend to struggle with that understanding of sort of ecological dynamics and the traditional, because traditional is so much easier, right? You know, you can go out there, you can spend 10 minutes on a session, you know what you want to nail. We're going to do passing today. We go out there, we're going to do some passing and make 4 drills, do some passing, go around some cones. All of a sudden, you know, everything looks perfect and then we can move on. But, you know, that never represented towards the game.
Yeah. And like you say, you know, the individuals themselves, they have to come at their activity in their own way, based on
Mm,
their own capabilities, and being cognizant of those capabilities and allowing them to come and solve the problems themselves. You know, that's the only solution you have. Not least of which, you partly because, you know, you don't have the lived experience that they have. So for you to come and
correct.
say, I think you should do it this way, without having any understanding of the way, you know, the way that their capabilities limit them, would be a terrible thing to do to a certain
Yeah,
extent.
I, I agreed. And I think a lot of the time that I would, and I guess this was that time where sort of the light bulb went on. And it was that I would say that this is what I'd like to do, but I don't know how you would solve this. So let's work together to see how you would solve this. Because I don't have the lived experiences. I'm not bound to a wheelchair. I'm not bound to the constraints that they have. So I don't know how to manipulate the constraints that they have, because I don't have them. I can manipulate the constraints I have. I have legs, I have arms, I can stand. I mean, I can manipulate those in a sort of movement solution, but how do they do that? So it was, I think that's where it started to become more an understanding about the learner. Okay, well, how would you solve this problem? And then we would spend time solving that problem. And I guess both of us, myself and the athlete, would then learn from that. And that was quite an experience, because you start to understand um, just how somebody lives in the world and some of the constraints they have to live with, and how they think. And uh, I felt sometimes I was there to support them in the decisions they were making more than coaching. And then I realized that is coaching.
It's interesting. You wouldn't be the first person who's said that, or has referred to the more individualized way of coaching as not coaching. I've heard that so
Yeah.
many times. So, um, so I'm just interested. I obviously do a lot of work with USA Hockey, and still do. Um, and I've been working with their coach development team to support their coach developers who then run those clinics, what they call clinics, which are the online things. Um, I'm curious, um, and the digital experience that they provide, and how they do that and all those sorts of things, really cool. But I'm curious to know, you mentioned earlier on, just circling back, that you kind of came at it and you felt like that was the one that you were more at home with. And I'd be
Yeah.
interested, did you go through the full journey all the way through to say what they call level five, or have you sort of gone, are you still on that journey developing and taking different things as you go?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to say that I was allowed to cheat, but I wasn't. So so I had to do the one, two. So I'm at this stage I'm level three. We also I'm a level three international as well. So the Australian I got to spend the week with Bob Mancini. You would know Bob.
I do know Bob
Yeah,
very well.
yeah. Lovely man. Once again, I got to spend a week with Bob in Melbourne on the was Ice Hockey Australia flew Bob over for the level three. And it was good. I was excited to meet Bob, and funny enough, because as you can imagine, 75,000 US coaches, there aren't that many Australians.
Mhm.
Um, and Bob was excited to meet me, which was, I guess, a nice feeling at the same time as well. So yeah, so I get to spend that time, but I just felt that they answered a lot of questions that I had without me having to ask the questions. I know that may sound, you have all this noise spinning around, you have all these questions, and then as they're moving through, you're seeing the answers appear, and you think, okay, well, that makes more sense. That makes sense. Ah, that's why I was thinking this way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's similar to me. The more I delved into the ecological world, the more the questions I had were answered by that kind of what is essentially a kind of almost like diametrically opposed paradigm from the traditional approach, or what you might call the sort of more um, traditionally educated
Yeah,
approach, the linear approach. Um, so anyway, we had a brief exchange on LinkedIn. You reached out to me and sort of told me a bit about your story. I'd just love to know a little bit more about kind of the journey you've been on. And before we do that, one question I had from earlier on actually is, did you get appointed into the role with it's with the Inferno you work with now, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Did you get appointed to that role?
You
Sorry, did you get
sorry.
appointed into
Yes,
the
no,
role
that's right.
because of your open ecological thing, or did they just find that that was you and oh right, this is now how it's working?
I would like to say yes. I would like to say yes, that's what they thought to themselves. Wow, this is fantastic. We have an ecological coach and we're going to run with this. I'd like to say yes. Yeah. I I'm I guess I'm a coach that's interested in people uh, at their core. So the understanding of that meant that I care, and I know that's I know that's not earth shattering for most coaches because we coach because we care. But I think that's sort of what they were maybe looking for at the time, someone that was different. And I'm not saying the coaches they had prior didn't care because they did, but it's just a different version of that, right? You if that version didn't work, they're looking for a different version that may suit what their needs were.
And did was it the sort of thing where, the post is sort of advertised and you apply for it, or did they approach you because they knew of you and what you were about?
No, it's always go. So Australia has a standard EOI, which is our expression of interest. It keeps everyone honest. So the EOI goes out, and then I guess they shortlist the applicants, and then they have meetings with those applicants, and then I guess they decide from those meetings whether that's the direction that they want to travel in a coaching environment.
And you were in that. I'm interested in coach recruitment actually because it's It's fascinating to see how people get roles. It's very different in different places. And in a lot of amateur sports, it's who's around, like who can we get, to lead the team. But this sounded like it was a much more deliberate approach, which is good to hear. In so when you were going through that recruitment process, what did that look like? I mean, were you asked to sort of put forward your ideas and your philosophy? Did you do a session? Were you observed? How did it work?
Yeah, so I guess there was a questionnaire that I had to fill in. Um, it was, I guess, it was a questionnaire that said no more than 2 pages, and I think mine might have hit 9 or 10 pages, which was a bit of a chuckle. Um, I thought, hey, if they don't want me here because I spent a little bit more time on it, then that's a decision they make. So I outlined my expectations for the year. I put down what I believe the team would need to do. I looked at the statistics side. Once again, I'm a data guy, so I looked a lot of the data and had a look at the way that they played, and I could see the game shifting here in Australia, where we're starting to see a very fast game, and Australia usually has. I have this concept. It's called environmental sports. So the sport resembles the environment that it's in. So if you're in Canada and you're playing lots and lots of ice hockey, the sport represents ice hockey as part of its representation. But we have things like AFL and basketball and cricket and all these other sports, and they all have influences in the way that we play sport here. So it's like the flavour of the state or the flavour of the country. Melbourne play hockey differently to Perth. Brisbane play hockey differently to Sydney because it's sort of a cultural environment that changes the way the game looks. So when I went back and looked at a lot of video, I watched the 23-24, 24-25 season, went through all the games, spliced them all up into, I guess, chunks that I could understand what was happening, and then part of the proposal that I put in was to change the way that they looked at the game, and I guess that's sort of what they were looking for at the time.
And how now you've really got my curiosity going. What patterns did you see? What was it that you saw as so sorry, two questions. First question. Uh I had James Vaughan on the show a while back, and his research is really interesting because he studied what you might call the socio what you've referred to as environmental sports, the socio-cultural constraints that influence the way coaching and teams play. And his observation was that it's actually over in Waikato at the moment, James Vaughan, actually working with Will Roberts. And James, he'd worked in Scandinavia, the UK, Spain, Portugal, and he noticed, and his research looked at how the dynamic culture of those countries and also areas within those countries influenced how people saw games and therefore how coaching and what was prized within those games. So the observation was, for example, that in Spain, where creativity and I'm generalizing and paraphrasing, obviously, but creativity and flair were very much prized. That influenced how the game was coached. And then in Scandinavia, where it's a much more what you might call egalitarian, more sort of, I guess, social democratic type model. They
Yeah,
were very much looking for team dynamics, cohesion, collaboration, no stars, that kind of thing. Whereas in,
yeah,
say, the
yeah,
UK, it's much more industrialized and you've got aspects of remnants of muscular Christianity and this notion of, we don't like creativity and flair, we prize work and ethic and all those sorts of things. So I'm kind of
yeah.
curious from your perspective how you would describe almost like the Australian approach to sport and what you then sort of adopt within your flow. I've got my own views as how I see Australian sport, but I'd be interested to see yours.
Um, I, I I like to think um, that our sport is the reality is that I feel that the coaching that people receive shape the way that they play. Um, and historically, in Australia, if you have an accent, you generally get coaching gigs over people who don't have accents. So predominantly, um, 25, 30 years of coaches with accents who got here 25 years ago and 20 years ago and 15 years ago, who are still very traditional based coaching, have sort of changed the way that the sport is played here. Um, a lot of so going through all the data, lots of things that I could see was um, the Western Australia do quite well. We, for the number of players we have playing in the state, we do quite well in the National League. I think we're probably third in numbers, but most of the time we might be hitting second and first and sometimes third. But we sort of sit in the high numbers where we don't have the high numbers of players. So I guess the benefit of that is that lots of the same people get lots of the ice time. Um, and they get lots of turnover, and there's lots of those things, and lots of what I call coach touches, where they get to speak to coaches, they get involved a lot more. So I think that helps, not having lots and lots of people from that perspective. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't help the the long game. It helps the short game where you're thinking about today and tomorrow, but doesn't help the long game. And we're looking for athletes in their 19, their 20s, their 25s, where we only have three or four of those in each of the states, as opposed to, somewhere like, the US and Canada, where they have thousands in that age group. So that's the thing I saw, is a very much an old based game, very traditional, the way they played, very north south. The European games shifted towards more of an east west type game, more the four roles, which is something that USA Hockey's been sort of, they don't push that until sort of year two, and then sort of more into year three, where you have instead of having sort of the old technical term of F1, F2, F3, which is forward one, forward two, forward three, we now have sort of the puck carrier, the person who has the puck, and then on his team who's supporting him. And then you have who's the defender on the puck carrier, and then who's the defender off the puck carrier, so off the puck. So they're the four roles and how they transition through the game. And a lot of the time, I wasn't seeing a lot of that. I was still seeing that structured, rigid F1, F2, F3. And then if that scenario didn't fit the environment at the time, a lot of teams struggled to, I guess, change and transition to what they needed to do. So part of the 54-page document that I wrote for Inferno, once again, always tend to do more than less, was identify these things. So I understand how their identity looked inside the four roles. What were the themes we were going to run through trainings inside these four roles? How did we want to look? What did the game look like for us, and how did we want to play around that game? So all these things were environmental. The psychological understanding of what that looked like. What does it take to play at a level that we need to be at to win this game? What does it take for us to understand our second effort? What type of pressure do we need to put on the puck and on the puck carrier if we're defending? And what type of support do we need to put on the puck if we have the puck? So those were all decisions that had to be made prior to even stepping on the ice, because they shape the way that you create environments to be able to have those things in there. And I think that's quite important.
And it sounds to me like you had the players actively involved in making the decisions around the best way for you to activate those roles and what happened within those roles, so that you built this shared understanding uh, between the players. I'm assuming you didn't just do that, in the kind of, with the whiteboard and the video in the room. That would have been some of that, but it was a lot of that on ice.
Yeah, I'd like to say I did that well. Um, Once again, even coaches fail forward, right? Um, Part of the process was developing some type of psychological safety. So they knew that failure was part of the journey, not something. It wasn't tied to a big stick that you could be beaten with. Um, so those are the things that we spent a bit of time on, sort of getting an understanding that for us to explore different solutions to a problem, some of them aren't going to work. Those were the conversations I had, and I did that through, documentation, like creating sort of Google documents for them to read. I had coaching staff that I had to develop as well, so I would end up sort of doing an athlete version of the coaching plan that they would get a few days in advance, and then I would do a coach version of that, which would then break down the methodology behind each of the tasks and what they were doing and why we were doing them and how we were going to spotlight certain things and what outcomes we were looking for. And if those outcomes didn't eventuate, we would then, alter the constraints to suit those outcomes. Sort of, we created, I guess, a global constraint-based task around it. So that was the outcome we were after, a 2-1-2, for instance, which is a four-checking system. Um, Understanding that that's still part of the game, but allowing the athletes to, I guess, problem solve the role as opposed to being very scripted. So, and I've got to be honest, a lot of the athletes struggled with the autonomy, and it's one of those things that yeah, I did a deep dive into sort of learner centered environments, because I think that was probably the biggest learning thing I had to do, was look at what scaffolding looked like, how, what is holding, the athlete, what was giving the athlete support. And it's tricky to do all that as a single coach with and the only person in the room that's ecological.
Yeah, that I really hear you, and I relate to what you're saying because not only are you trying to develop the athletes, you're also trying to develop a coaching staff who are probably less versed in ecological thinking than you are, and so to be able to rely on them to relay your ideas is quite challenging. I find often as well that I find when I work with other coaches that I wince a bit because, like, you're built. So, for example, you just using your really good example there of actually, and I've really experienced this myself, where when you are going to work in a more exploratory way, and we are going to work from the individual backwards and get them to understand more about how they approach a task or a challenge or a situation or a puzzle or whatever it might be. Um, there is inevitably, as you rightly say, failure of some kind. There's going to be things that go wrong, and that's where the learning is, and that's rich. But if you're with a group who are very used to um, the coach being the arbiter of right and wrong, and that feedback being provided continuously, they become very, there's sort of almost like that learned helplessness where they abdicate their own decision making and also actively avoid uh, mistakes, errors, because that's something that either gets praise or admonishment and determines ice time and selections and all these sorts of things. So
Yeah,
when you're in that, you've
yeah.
got that cultural dynamic that you're trying to address. And you're taking a group on a journey, and I call this like a periodization of methodology because it can be very destabilizing for a group to go from that to a more open, exploratory approach. They feel quite, whoa,
One
this is weird.
100%, 100%, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I mean, uh, if we're not into scripting, you scripted it well. The whole idea that when you do a deep dive into autonomy for children and autonomy for adult men and autonomy for women, they're all different. So, what does autonomy look like for a 22-year-old man versus autonomy for a 25-year-old woman? And then those are the things that you have to sort of, I guess, understand what that looks like. And, and part of that autonomy is, if you're in the learner based application, part of your autonomy is how you control the noise when you do fail. How do you recover from failure? How do you chalk that failure up to it's just another go? I have this term called sampling. It's one of these things that sort of it helps me in my mind, and I like it because it's like I consider every problem like a buffet. You're going to go up there and you're going to sample a few different versions until you actually sort of put a meal together you enjoyed. Um, so sampling is one of those things I like to talk about. So when I sort of talk about the task, I want them to sample different outcomes, and and because they're very much coach centered, they want and it's not even a want, and I use that word wrong. They need the feedback because um, they're not listening to what the environment tells them, right? I wrote an article for the coaches site, and it talks about basically the three forms of feedback. And part of that, first of those, is the environmental feedback. You know, you're getting feedback all the time. The players on the ice, the position of where you are, how much time do I have, what pressure do I have? That's feedback, right? And then whether the task, did you succeed or did you fail? I mean, that's feedback as well. You don't need someone to tell you you failed when you actually failed. If I didn't score a goal, I don't need someone to tell me I didn't score a goal. So that's your feedback, and then you have that coach-based feedback, which is what they're looking for. And I felt that a lot of athletes today who are very much coach-centered don't hear the environmental feedback, and they don't hear the sort of that type of feedback from whether they succeeded or failed. They're more looking for feedback from the coach to see whether they succeeded in the coach's expectation as opposed
Right.
to being able to solve the problem.
Yeah,
And I
that's
feel that a lot of players, they struggle with that. And I don't think we do enough work, and this is personally, I don't think we spend enough time even developing that with coaches. That you can't have a constraint-led approach. You can't have ecological dynamics. You can't have non-linear pedagogy if you're leaving everyone out in the cold, because you're asking for autonomy, but they don't understand what that autonomy means. You're asking for them to make decisions, but they're wanting you to give them the solution to the problem. You're asking for them to explore, but they're fearful of failure. So you're setting them up to fail if you haven't set up any type of framework or scaffolding. And the reality of this is, when you're one person, and like I look after a development squad as well. So Perth Inferno comes with a development squad. So in the end, I look after about 40 women, aged from 14 years of age up to 45. And half of those play in the Inferno, which is a travel team, and the other half are more for development. So looking after the whole women's program in Western Australia. And two completely different versions of what that looks like. So those are the things. If you ask me what lesson I learned this year or last year, it would be the understanding about learner-centered environments and how they can fail, and how sort of they're not, if you don't structure them correctly, they fail.
yeah. I have a lot of similar experiences. I think, uh, and again, your points about autonomy are a really good one. I've not really thought about it in those terms, but yeah, you're right in the sense that, and again, this is generalizing, but what I've noticed is, and what you made me think about was, I worked for a period of time in one of the national age group academies for GB field hockey, and they did a bit of an experiment where they brought together uh, multiple age groups, U16, U18, with but boys and girls together mixed, and not a lot of guidance really around the way you run the academy. But we were there, and I think we had about 40 athletes. So it's a significant number, one pitch, you've got to do quite a lot. And we worked lots of different ways of sort of mixing up the groups. Sometimes it was different ages together. Sometimes it was, we and play positions, this sort of stuff. One of the things I noticed though was how the boys often, because their notion of autonomy was and interestingly, it was also interesting to notice their biography, and the biography became going back to our point earlier about individualization. Their biography very often was quite determinant in the way they approached what was a more
Mm.
kind of exploratory, no right and wrong, athlete led to a certain extent, or certainly more athlete centered approach. And I noticed some really struggle, boys and girls, but the boys particularly. I could almost tell you just by the way they approach the activities. I could almost tell you what type of school they went to, and I could
Yeah.
almost tell you which school they went to the point where I could tell if, for example, they went to an independent school versus if they were state educated or more club activity led. And I could also pretty much tell you the kind of school, or I couldn't definitely say which school, but I had a rough idea of which school it was because you could sort of see how
Yeah.
they approach certain things. And on the difference between boys and girls, and it's just by way of an illustrative story, I remember distinctly we were playing a sort of a fairly big-ish game, and one of the female players picked up the ball in attack and was basically 1v1 against this giant under 18, 6'2" boy man, right? And
Superhuman.
she was about 15 or something, right? But of
Yeah.
real had a lot of potential. And she went, right, I'm gonna have him. I'm gonna go for it. And you saw her do it, right? And this guy, she just absolutely turned him inside out and was just about to go through on goal. And he managed, by virtue of his physicality, to reach out and just about nick the ball. And he walked away like he was the king of the north, and and he just had it all. And she was sort of a bit crestfallen. And I called her to me, and I said to her, talk me through that. And she said, "Oh, maybe I should have held it up and passed," or da da da. And it was basically in her own mind, she designed that as a failure. And we'd done a
Yeah.
lot of work to try and design the idea that this is what we're looking for. And I was saying to her, I said, "Oh, it's interesting that you see it that way. For me, I thought it was the best thing I've seen this evening." And the reason I felt it was the best thing I saw this evening was because you had a go. You bought into the idea that we're gonna have a go at things so that we can learn from them and develop them. But the biggest thing you did was to go there. So and that was the sort of discussion we had. I'm paraphrasing the conversation, but the point I'm trying to make about that is that what I was taking from this was this notion of autonomy, and how she came at the session was hugely influenced by her life experiences. And those life experiences had taught her that actually there's a lot of risk you carry when you when you become an individual and you break away from the group and you have a go at things. And for a female in a particular environment that she'd grown up in and all that sort of stuff, loads of risk. And therefore, it's very difficult sometimes to encourage a group or even offer the opportunity for a group to take those kinds of risks, to break free, to be a little bit more individual, to do things a little bit differently. And it's just something I just took away as a bit of a learning experience. That's a really long-winded explanation, so apologies for that story. But
Well, and also from the if we looked at a male autonomy versus the female autonomy, they would tend to be more team orientated. They would tend to spend more time in sharing in the outcome. They would want to bring people along for the journey. They care that the athletes that are around them are succeeding as well. These are all sort of very strong objectives that you need to understand. And then in a male version of that, I scored the goal.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
so so and you can really I've coached mixed teams where the girls, my belief, and it's my belief, is that most female athletes, when they're playing in a mixed environment, tend to be at the back, not at the front. They don't tend to get as much coach time as the boys do. So traditionally, by default or by accident, the coaching has been creating them into believing that the coach will tell them what to do when it's needing to be done, as opposed to giving them an opportunity to try something different and you know laugh when we fail because we've got another. I always talk to people about it, and they say, "Oh, yeah, but I failed." And I said, "Well, that's great." And they go, "Well, that makes no sense." I said, "Well, that's one less thing we have to think about when we try and solve the problem the next time." You
Mm.
know, so and then part of that sort of global constraint is trying to reduce as many solutions as you possibly can, so they find the solution to the problem you created from scaling and adjusting the numbers and basically the way that ecological dynamics talks about how you guide the athlete to a solution that suits the way that they would solve the problem in the shortest distance of time without scripting the outcome. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
It sounds to me like you're having some success. Now, this might be just by chance, of course, but it seems to me that the athletes are responding well and you're seeing some results better than were happening previously. Expand on that. Feel free to, big it all up. Who knows? But I'm just interested.
um, I would like to say that I'm the hero in this story, but that's probably not the case. I think the reality of this is that they um, there are certain ways you need. I believe that um, everything is about the psychology of the game. It's never really about the skill of the game per se. Um, I have this real belief on not just the psychological safety, but how we use psychology. Ice hockey is a very simple sport. It's time and space, and inside that time and space, it's how you work with the psychology. What pressures do you use? So when I started to create environments based around that, I created environments that suited the game that I wanted them to play. So every task that we did was based around the game that I wanted to play. Now, this didn't match the game that they were playing. This matched a different game, a game that I wanted them to be, I guess, articulate in, for them to understand what those psychological pressures are, what time constraints they have, what space constraints they have. So, from a task design using ecological dynamics, I would say 100% built around the environment that I wanted them to play in. Ecological dynamics ticked every box the way I wanted to do. Most of the athletes wanted to do flow drills. It's your fear as well. Flow drills is where you have five people standing around and all they're doing is stationary passing, and one person out of the 40 is skating around in circles and then has a shot on net. I feel
Doesn't sound like
flow
flow to me.
drills no flow at all. The only thing that was flowing was,
Yeah.
yeah. The reality is that it's just not a great space, and I didn't feel that it was where we wanted to be. But it's hard because uh, and only having 45 minutes a week to train. So very much, how do I change their understanding of the game to suit a game that they've never played before in 45 minutes. And that's the task that I set for myself. Because, if I feel that, and I have this belief that if I think the athlete has to learn, they have to be uncomfortable. If they're comfortable in what they're doing, they're not really learning anything. They're just rehearsing something, right? If they're comfortable in standing around doing flow drills, they're not learning anything. They're just rehearsing something that may or may never happen. We're never going to be invited to the stage to be in this play that somebody has invented. We're playing a live game. So I had to basically make sure that the environment played a game that they had never played before. So every task was a battle game. Every task was you are either a 1-on-1, a 2-on-1, a 2-on-2, a 3-on-2, and everything had time constraints. When the offense picked up the puck, they had 3 seconds to score. when the defense picked up the puck, they had 5 seconds to clear. They weren't allowed to throw the puck away. They had to either pass the puck or create soft ice, which meant they had to support their own player. They had to look for environments that they could move the puck around. Every task we did was based around this. We would start off with a small area game. We would go to a mid-ice game. We would go to a three-quarter game, and then we would finalise at the end of the 45 in a full ice game. There'd be no stops or starts, no whistles. The game was flowing because really the girls have to be able to skate for 2 minutes for a game that lasts 45 seconds. So those are the things that we had to do because that was the type of game that I wanted them to play, a game that they'd never seen before. Ecological dynamics, the sort of non-linear pedagogy, the constraint-led approach, they are built for this. If you did nothing else but understand the game that you want to play, you actually have to train that way. And then you can't do that in a basic drill. You can't do that in something that you can't control the environment. So if you did nothing else and if you didn't believe in anything else, if you wanted your team to play the way you want them to play, this is the only way you could do it.
It's interesting. I God, there's so much to unpack. The It strikes me that just at its most basic level, you took a group who were previously focused on their attention was drawn towards movement execution because they were doing what you describe as flow drills, which were much more focused on how do I
100%.
execute movements that are going to be more or less effective in given situations. Not even in given situations, just more or less effective in terms of outcome. And you took the attention from that towards an attention on interaction. How do we interact with each other and our opponents in order to achieve something in a semi-coordinated way and a shared understanding of how we interact and our interactions? And you just placed focus from one to the other by virtue of an entirely different practice paradigm. That's how I
Yes,
interpreted what you just told me.
and that's exactly right. I still got, week 5 and understand that we played small area games and it wouldn't be one person. It would be 6 people on the ice. It'd be 8 people on the ice. We'd be playing in one zone. So one zone might be from the goal line to the blue line. We'd be playing end to end. We'd be doing this. And I don't know how many times I got asked whether we were going to practice passing.
Even though there'd been like 80 odd passes just happened in the last 5 minutes.
Plus, just in the last 5 minutes. And what that was, those were the, and I expected that, right? I did expect that because their perception, that's one of the other things that, when you're coaching, people try to think to themselves that everything has to be perfect. Now, I think it just has to be efficient.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be perfect because it's not adaptable if it's perfect. If it's efficient, I can adapt it. So, they would get upset when I wouldn't pull them up on passes that never made, it wasn't a tape-to-tape pass. It wasn't perfect. But we went from traveling at 15 k's an hour to 22 k's an hour. So the environment's changed. Of course, stationary passing backwards and forwards would be really great if we're all standing around passing. But the passing became less, perfect because the environment changed. And they struggled with that. They struggled with, I haven't practiced backward skating. We need to practice backward skating. Oh, we played full ice 5-on-5. At some point, you must have skated backwards. In that environment, you didn't think about skating backwards. It was just the most efficient movement solution at the time. So you didn't need to spend time thinking about practicing it. You just did it. And then because it suited the type of game that we were wanting to play, it then became efficient for what you needed in the game. And if it didn't, it failed. And then you had that environmental feedback to tell you that I need to do something different. I need to transition earlier. I need to spend more time on this. I need to work out what that looks like. So there's living feedback. There's feedback from the game. There's feedback from the ice. There's feedback from the decisions you made. Way before you need to get to the bench and the coach is saying you should have probably skated a bit harder. That internal skate a bit harder, where that's the thing that I think hurts people the most is the language we use. Close the gap is better than skate faster. What does skate faster mean? Do I move my legs quicker? Do I go for my arms faster? Or what am I actually trying to do? Am I trying to catch the puck carrier? So I'm closing the gap. So those are the conversations that they struggled with because they were still looking at that perfect pass. And there's also, it's such a traditional environment that we live in that if you looked from the outside in and didn't see anyone standing around sort of passing, then you would think that we didn't have any intent on them becoming better passers. But the reality is I needed to create passes that could pass in an environment that was traveling at 22 k's an hour. I always have this thing that people ask me about what that looks like. And I always say to them, well, okay, so you want to learn to cross the road. So there are no cars on the road. I walk backwards and forwards. I can dance, I can sing, I can do whatever I want. And now the cars are traveling at 50 k's an hour. Can I dance? Can I sing? No, I'm running for my life. So it's a different environment that I've learned on. So I need to make sure that they understand that the skills that they need are suited to the environment that we want to play. And the only way that you can really, I guess, attract those skills, the only way you can actually turn those into things that I can use is actually do the space and do the time and have the pressure. How much time and pressure do I have? Well, if I increase the pressure, reduce the amount of time, reduce your amount of space, you've now got to make decisions. So that means now you've got to start thinking about the game a bit more. You've got to start wondering how I protect the puck, how I look at these things. So without me spending half an hour showing somebody how to protect the puck, they are now involved in doing that themselves, working it out. And sometimes it won't work and sometimes it will. And then I'll ask the question, what were the decisions that you made? How did they impact the last 30 seconds? What did you do differently that we were able to get that puck out? Those questions about them having to go back and rewind and have a look at what they did and explore some of those things. And then I tried getting them to, and once again, it didn't always work because some people are looking for that. How did I do, coach? How did I do? Did I do it right? And that's the struggle, right? Because you've got to try and be that. You're trying to be one version of a coach, but you also have to try and think about the safety of those people not getting feedback. And there's only so much you can give without it sort of, breaking the methodology that you're trying to create. And then you're giving mixed signals all the time. So that's the hardest part of the coaching when you move to a sort of an athlete or learner-centered environment is how much feedback should I give them? And am I just pulling them back into that coach-centered environment, or am I leaving them out to sort of flounder and panic in a space where they feel that nobody's giving them any real any real feedback? So, and not having the support staff that understand the concepts of ecological dynamics and concepts of athlete-centered environments, that didn't help as well. So that's always been a struggle, and I think that's why coaches tend to move away from this environment because they don't have the support in the back end for all these things.
Did you inherit your assistant coaches?
So that's a very good question. So my assistant coach, so I have an ice hockey academy as well. So it's called NRG Ice Hockey. And what we do in there is we develop movement solutions. And one of my athletes, Kai, nice Canadian kid, 18 years of age. I always chuckle because his dad sent him to Australia to learn. He was playing in a house league on third line. He came over to Australia to see his dad because his dad worked at the university, spent some time with me, went back, became the captain of that team, after spending a summer with me. So I always joke that we're sending Canadians to Australia to learn how to play hockey. Um, so yes, so Kai's so through our 17U program, because Kai's used to. I like to think that Kai's used to my madness, and he understands that there's a why in everything we do, and everything is intentional. Whether he understands the why, that's something that he will learn as he gets sort of older and spends more time sort of exploring this space. But he understands that there is an intent, and he understands there is a why to everything. So Kai helped me out with the 17U program, and then Kai was an assistant coach with me on one of the state teams. So I sort of made sure that, and Kai's a lovely kid, and one of the things he brings is that 18-year-old enthusiasm. A 55-year-old man does not do that. So he brings that along. So that worked really well in my favor from that perspective as well. But once again, he only has the ability to be able to do what he can do, and that's not a reflection on him. That's just the time that he spent doing this. Um, yeah, so that's the reality of that. You know, I documented what I wanted to do. I don't think anybody read it. I got asked for the one-page version. It's very difficult to turn a 54-page document into one page. I uh, I ended up making a podcast for them. So I created a podcast out of it. And then they were allowed to listen to the podcast in their car, which gave them ability to be able to listen to the approach as opposed to having to read the approach. And that got quite good feedback. So we did quite a few different sort of AI-based podcasts that would tear out the information and give them the understanding of what ecological dynamics was, what the pathway was, what was the methodology, and those things. I think that helped. Yeah, so sort of leveraging technology was something that sort of we looked at from that perspective to be able to assist athletes that weren't probably going to read a 54-page manual.
Notebook LM.
Yes, 100%. I would swear by it. The podcast version is just to die for.
Absolutely amazing. They got a new feature actually, which I was using recently. They create really, really high quality infographics and also slide decks. So I did
It's a
some
good
stuff
video
on,
version as well. Have you
yeah, and
done the
video. Yeah, I've
video
seen
one?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's
yeah.
awesome.
I've just done some stuff for USA Hockey actually, which around task decomposition versus task simplification because they were running a
Oh,
clinic
yeah,
and
nice.
they reached out to me to say, "Well, have you got anything on this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I could probably put something together." Bingo, there it is. Wow, look at these slides. Send them across. Um, but yeah, I mean, the way it actually creates stuff from relatively short prompts is really quite powerful. Anyway, um, so what Kai doesn't realize of course, is he's actually now getting probably one of the best coaching apprenticeships that you're ever likely to get without realizing, right? Being involved in the madness, so as you rightly say.
Yeah, well, it is. Everyone just thinks you're a lunatic sometimes, you know. You haven't yet, you know. But I'm just letting the animals out, and they're just kicking the puck around down one end. And all I'm doing is making sure no one gets hurt. I think that was certainly one of the things that a parent said to me once. You are, I mean, if you're doing anything, you're at least making sure they don't get hurt, right? Yes, that's the only reason I'm here.
um,
Well,
the the interesting thing, I would just to sort of reflect on that a little bit, is how having a 54-page document in the first place, whatever, just as an articulation of your philosophy, and from the get go, making that explicit and clear to the athletes is a really interesting area. I've noticed this with ecological practitioners that I speak to is there's a need to be explicit about the method because it's it's what's the word? It's seen as being sort of quite avant-garde or quite different, and therefore people come at it and can sometimes look a little bit sideways at it, and they're, "Ooh, what's going on here? This is a bit." So there's a need to be that. But equally, I think whether or not you were coming from an ecological perspective or not, I imagine you would have something like that because of your belief in the need for the learner to understand the why, as you quite rightly say. I often used to refer to selling the why, but it's the learner being actively an active learner. They have to genuinely understand where you're coming from in their journey. Otherwise, they
Yeah.
can actually feel like they're being, again, it goes back to that point about destabilization. They can feel cut adrift, like they're in the wilderness and they're struggling along, and it feels really so uncomfortable to them that it's actually almost. I'm not going to say trauma is an overused word, but it can be feel a little traumatic to them.
No, no, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I think it is the right word. I think it's a measure of how they feel at the time, and they feel helpless. And that happens, you know. We won a game 10-0, and I had three girls leave the bench crying. Yeah. Um,
Wow.
and that's something that was new to me. Um, uh, that was something that was new. And then I had to try and navigate that, to understand that. And that's just emotion. And that's not being able to regulate your emotion. And I don't think they were crying from winning. They were, sometimes. So I have this belief, right? When you play in a team, not everyone is the scorer. Right? It's not everyone's a striker, right? We know this. But in a game where the only measure you really have is plus and minuses, goals for and goals against, some people feel that they don't put any, they're not involved, even though you look at their structure and they didn't have any goals scored on them. And then it's such a fast-paced game. It's such a chaotic game. It's very easy to score a goal if the team is not aware. If their intent isn't to stop you, you're scoring goals. That's just the nature of this game. How fast it plays, the small ice that we're on, the amount of distance you cover in such very short times. If your intent is not to stop goals being scored, you score goals. So, and they didn't understand this, so they felt that they'd failed the team because of the fact is that they didn't have, they weren't scoring, they weren't on the board. So, and that was the pressure that they put themselves in, and that's the feeling that they had, and that's the emotion that came out, that they were distressed from this. They felt they'd failed. They felt that they weren't being heard. They didn't feel they got feedback enough, and maybe the feedback that I could have given them would have changed the course of the game, and they may have scored more goals because of feedback that I may or may not have given them. If I'd structured it more and told them what to do, they may have been able to score more goals. So these are the things that they go through from that learner-based sort of psychological understanding. And once again, I don't feel we do enough in educating coaches in that space. We certainly, there were some new things that I learned there. And it doesn't matter how much research you do, it doesn't matter how much reading you do. This is something that happens, and it's something that you've got to manage. And when you have no support staff, and it's not that I didn't have support staff, I didn't have support staff that understood what was happening. That happens, and then you've got to try and navigate that as well. So, yeah, it's different from coaching the women to coaching, say, 17U, where predominantly all boys. Your structure's different. They're not after feedback per se. What they want is information. They want more information. I know, what did that look like? What else could I have done? And then you can interact with them differently. They're asking you questions. I feel sometimes in the women's teams, they don't want to ask questions because they're terrified of the answer they may be given, or that question might show that they don't understand, or that question may put them in a position where the coach may be disappointed in the question. And I feel that's something that coaches need to learn, that's if we create an environment that's how they feel, we will never get anyone becoming autonomous. They'll just be robots, and we'll just be controlling them from the bench.
But there's going back to your point earlier on. There's safety in not having a lack in having a lack of autonomy when when you are purely and simply the um, an object to be utilized by another, then actually you don't have to get too emotionally involved in it,
No.
and you can just almost like outsource some of your emotion to the controller. And I can
Yeah,
understand how somebody who is very um, kind of enculturated to that way of being would find becoming more emotionally invested and psychologically invested in an activity would raise their awareness of whether they feel like they're making the right contribution or making enough of a contribution or not, which would then lead to emotional overload. And
100%.
I bet it was as surprising to them as it was to you that that happened.
Yes, yes. And that's 100%. When you're autonomous, you you wear the failure personally.
Yeah.
When you're being controlled by another, that failure is somebody else's.
Yes.
They told me to do it.
Yes.
So, um, and that's where you've got to start looking at how do you teach athletes to self-regulate their emotions, how to understand what failure looks like, how to understand what safety looks like in failure, how to understand that I'm happy to walk away in a game, whether we win or we lose. But I'm not happy to walk away from a game that nobody sort of tried, that nobody put their second effort in, that nobody put they didn't try and explore. Those are the things that we as coaches are really looking for. That's what I look for. The scoreboard just tells me, it just tells me a number. That's all it does. The intent on how we played is the most important part to me. And like I said, I wouldn't care if we lost every game. It's an indicator. That's all it is. It's just numbers for me. It just tells me whether my pathway, whether the trainings match the game that we want to play. It does nothing else but give me feedback on whether I need to change the environment, whether I need to adjust for different things, whether I have to think about different things. That's all the scoreboard does for me in games like this. Um, the most important part for me is to develop a team through the 20 weeks before we get to finals that is prepared and ready to play the game that we want to play. So that's the reality of this. And I know that may sound, at a high level coaching, that may sound odd, but once again, I'm looking for data, I'm looking for feedback, I'm looking for information from the environment, and that means whether was the intent, did we score goals, did we not score goals, why didn't we score goals, was it our pressure, were we fast enough, what were the things that were our rate limiters in this that I can then look at from a developmental pathway and start creating environments, start creating tasks that expose those problems for us to then find solutions for. So then when those problems arise again, they'll have solutions for them when they step back on the ice.
It seems to me that um, that sort of emotional overload would be an indicator that you're doing something right. If you didn't get that, you'd maybe ask yourself, am I doing it right? Because I guess to a certain extent, I'm just reflecting aloud really, that you would, if you haven't got people emotionally and psychologically invested in the learning process and they are disassociated, then they wouldn't have that kind of emotional response. So the fact you're getting some of that should be, I think, an indicator, as much as it's difficult to deal with, that actually we're on a good journey here. People are starting to buy into this. People are starting to feel something about it, which is an interesting view or observation, perhaps.
Yeah, it is, and that's generally what because once again, I'm data driven, so I go back to and I read about it, and I make sure that I understand it, and I make sure that I'm prepared because that's a problem I need to solve, right? Even as a coach, I have to think about this ecologically as well. I have to create environments of safety, but I also have to create environments where they struggle. I
Mm,
have to create environments where they're challenged. I have to create environments where they're going to have to think their way out of this. I'm going
mm,
to have to create environments that are going to show up in the type of game that we want to play, and I need them to be prepared.
Mm.
Um, and in doing that, um, you get tears and you get emotions and you get frustration and you get those things because the reality is they bought in and they care. So
Mm.
those are things that they care that they fail. And I guess that we don't, as coaches, we probably don't understand enough about that. I think if if I was to do a coaching course and it was going to be on sort of non-linear. I was going to say that's the umbrella name for all these different philosophies and sort of
Yeah.
pedagogy under this one thing. Part of that would be I would probably start in a very linear process, which is sad, but I would start with an athlete-centered environment and what that looks like. Because how can you, and I've said this before, how can you ask someone to be autonomous when they don't know what that looks like, when they don't know what that's supposed to feel like, when they don't know what what their expectation is, they don't know what your expectation is. How can you ask someone to explore when exploration in the past has been beaten out of them? They're being told what to do, and now they're going to an environment where no one is telling them what to do in the moment. Those are the things that I would focus on, and I've got to, I haven't done my level 4 and I haven't done my level 5 with USA Hockey. Hopefully, they're going to be talking about what a learner environment looks like, and hopefully they're going to be that because I think that's the biggest thing that as a coach I struggled with from that perspective is understanding the safety nets, the scaffolding, and the who's going to protect the athletes from themselves in this space, who's going to give them I guess that belief that everything is on track, other than myself, and I'm the guy creating all the madness. Um, so
It's like
yes,
it's like taking a caged tiger from a zoo and putting them in the jungle and going, now you're free.
100%.
It's just as
That's the best analogy.
just as dangerous to
Yes,
that individual as the other way round.
and I couldn't put it better myself. That is exactly how it is. Um, and that should be a course in itself. Uh, it should be a course in itself. You've got to teach that lion to hunt again.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I actually
yeah,
think that is, you're right. I think that is a course in itself for people who are attracted towards a more non-linear approach to or athlete centered approach towards environment design, etc., etc. Understanding what it takes to take a group who are caged tigers, so to speak, and let them move into that sort of jungle experience and the process you go through to enable them to become hunter killers is a big area that needs a lot of exploration. I don't think it's a course necessarily, but it's a sort of thing that we could actively work towards. Interestingly enough, actually, it's a central conversation, a recurring conversation within the learning group that I have, which I call the Guild. We talk about this stuff a lot because most people are experiencing this, and it's the journey that actually we're learning from each other on. I sort of facilitate the conversation, but it's generally speaking, that tends to be the theme that emerges quite often.
yeah. It's certainly eye opening. You know, you think you're doing a lot, but you don't. Sometimes you're not just doing enough. I created an environment where that lion gets to, or the tiger gets to learn to hunt. I created an environment where they get to hunt in an environment that I'm setting out for them. I get to teach them all of this, but I don't give them an opportunity to understand what the safety of that looks like and where they feel safe to themselves, and are they lonely in that one singular space, and is everybody else thinking that? So those are the things that we really need to sort of spend more time in. And I think that's, when you look at what the national programs, USA Hockey and all these guys do, they teach you about constraint-led approach. They teach you about the golden thread. They teach you about constraint-led approach. And I feel that you can't really get the true constraint, the true CLA, the true exploration, the true of these things if people are doing these things and still wondering what failure and fear looks like. And I don't know whether that's something that will change with time, with the more people doing the sort of the CLA, the more people looking at the nonlinear approach, the more people involved in this, maybe that conversation becomes more a sort of a conversation between many as opposed to a conversation between few.
Yeah, as good as the coach education program that USA Hockey provide, and it is good, it is really good. I've said this to them before that, I think they're one of the world leading organizations when it comes to this. They also recognize that coach education is limited in terms of its utility because you're getting knowledge about something, not necessarily knowledge of something. You've
Yeah,
taken your
correct.
knowledge about it, applied it to your context, and now you're gaining the knowledge of as you explore what the utilization is with this cohort group. It's one of the reasons I advocate a lot in my work in coach development for more people to have access to people who have more of an understanding of their context, because then you've got somebody giving you guidance and support based on your own experiences, because that's the one thing coach education can never do. It can never understand your context fully, and that's where the real power comes in. So I'd like to see a coach education paradigm shift which goes, yes, we'll give you the knowledge of, but we're also going to give you the knowledge in, sorry, not the knowledge about as well as the knowledge of and the knowledge in,
Yeah,
because we will
yeah.
we will we will help you on a learning journey that's focused around your context.
I think with the USA Hockey, their belief is that you're going to take that information and you're going to explore it yourself. I guess that, if they're promoting coaches teaching exploration, they would probably hope that their coaches are exploring. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, you can't be the tour guide and not actually see what you're touring around. So you get to actually see all those things and you get to understand those things. And I guess that was something that I enjoyed a lot. I felt that starting using that as a platform to work forward from and understanding where that could take me, it would allow me to explore that more. And I feel that um, having that expectation and exploring the process more and having a more of an understanding, and I sort of moved and I joke about this, but I moved from being a coach to more being a scientist, where I made multiple versions of the same thing in different scenarios to see which one would trigger events, which one would change outcomes, which one would work differently. And then I'm looking for that environmental feedback to tell me, well, did I get better a better outcome with this? Did I see them more towards the sort of the spotlighting that I was looking for? So I feel that's sort of what I do a lot of. I do a lot of sort of, run two teams, have one team that's a different version, one team's traditional, the other team's ecological, run them together and see what that looks like and see which one worked, which one didn't work, and do a lot of those things because that's exploration. And I think coaches have to feel uncomfortable in their learning as well. Otherwise, they're just doing the same thing they did yesterday.
I mean, that's a perfect example. I think that's exactly how I think of it as well. You're essentially, when every time you run a practice, you're testing a hypothesis. And in
Yeah.
the session, you might make adjustments because you're getting sort of experimental data that's coming back that isn't corresponding with what your hypothesis was. So you tweak it and you amend it live in the session. And then over time, session to session to session, activity to activity to activity, you're refining what is your original hypothesis and your original experiment to improve it, make it better. And sometimes, because of the variability of humans, you have to make adjustments, even though you reckon you got the recipe right in the first instance.
Well, and you could have the recipe right on Tuesday, but
Yeah,
in 4 Tuesdays' time, they've evolved.
exactly.
Pressure's changed. The environment's changed. They've worked out how to cheat the constraint. I have one athlete, Olivia Del Basso. She is a brilliant player. She is an outstanding player, and she will break a constraint within the first 5 seconds. I will set a constraint where they have to sort of, we do this task. I call it the Olivia Del Basso because I named them all the tasks after the girls. So each girl has two or three tasks each, right? And the tasks are based around what they do really well. So it allows me to be able to share their knowledge in a task that everyone else gets to play with, right? And then they get to watch Olivia do it because that's what Olivia does well. And then they get to replicate that. So they not only get to see the feedback live, they get to see what that could be done a different way. They get to explore and experiment. So this one task is that you two people, so 1v1, you skate up, you grab the puck, and then you actually have to, you have opposites attract. So you've got to break into the ice to you, and you've got two opposite players. So that means that if I go this way, I'm attacking a defender. So that's all you got to do. Quick pass, grab the puck, skate in, beat the outside, pass to the middle, get the puck. It's a pretty simple task. It rolls pretty well. It's nice and fast. There's lots of changes, lots of stick movement, lots of movement. So there's lots of variability in the task. Every go is different. So Liv sets up. First time she goes, she has a go, does it perfectly, looks great. Second time she goes, she passes to the opposite side of her defense. Completely different task. Wasn't scripted, wasn't discussed, wasn't even had a conversation. That defense did a cross-ice transfer, put the puck straight in deep. She skated in, picked the puck up and shot on. Nothing like the way that I designed the task. Now, I don't draw little lines. I don't tell them where to go. I create spaces for them to basically explore. Well, she just created this whole new concept from this task. And I thought, she's just broken those constraints completely. She looked at the task differently. She decided that she didn't like the way that I'd set it up and did it completely different. That is exploration. That is what I look for. That is I would be happy if everyone broke every constraint that I did. Everyone broke every task I did because they decided that it could be done better or it could be done differently. So, and I actually even named that task before she broke it, the Olivia Del Basso task, because that's what Liv does. She crashes the puck, she forces everyone wide, and then she drives to the middle. That's what she does. And she's fantastic at it. I mean, she'd be the best in the country at it. So, yeah. So, and she broke it the second time. And then I had to try and sort of hold my excitement and my dismay at the same time. Because then I had 10 girls not having a clue about how this task works.
Can relate. But I can relate particularly to the conflicting moment of joy and begrudgement, whatever I want to call it. So brilliant, and you're so
Yes.
annoying, but I love it.
And this was perfect up until about 5 minutes ago.
Hey, listen, that's a great way to sort of wrap up the conversation. I want to be respectful of time given you're getting into your evening. Um, Listen, honestly, that's been a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad you reached out to me. I loved everything you were talking about. I know my colleagues at USA Hockey are going to be over the moon to hear how their education program has shaped you and is shaping what you're doing over there. Um, and yeah, I know people might be interested and might want to reach out and find out a bit more about what you do. So, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
You can find me on LinkedIn. And if you're a hockey coach, I've got sort of like 60 or 70 publications on the coaches side already, sort of talking about sort of leadership and how this looks like and how the ecological approach works and things like that. So you just type in Barry Jones into LinkedIn, you'll find me pretty quickly. It's all sort of very ecological.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. And by the way, the fifth element of the golden thread is stretch. Has to be a bit of stretch, doesn't it? That's right.
Yes,
Yeah, it came
yes.
back to me earlier on. Barry, really appreciate you joining me. Really fantastic conversation. All the best with what you're doing, and look forward to the rest of your season. And I'm going to be tracking the Inferno and your results, and obviously your onward march towards the finals and the rest.
That's the plan.
Appreciate it. Bye.